Andrew Williamson here. Welcome back to Williamson Education. It's a new day, and it's time for a new unit. In our most recent lessons, we delved into the fascinating world of idioms in American English. As I repeatedly emphasized, it would be well near impossible for me or for you to learn all of the idioms in the English language. What we learned was just an introduction to the topic, a first attempt at figuring out how to identify and analyze idioms. In this next unit of 4 lessons, we will thankfully be able to cover much more of the ground. This next unit will cover the topic of parallelism and comparisons. I'll teach you about these 2 essential topics in English language grammar so that your writing and speaking can gain a new level of complexity. We'll begin our discussion with the topic of parallelism. And I'm sure you must be wondering, what could parallelism have to do with the English language? After all, if you've taken any math classes in English, you'll know that you're much more likely to hear about parallel structures in, say, geometry class than in a class on grammar and style. As I'm sure you know from those geometry classes, parallel lines are lines that run next to each other and never cross, even when they extend to infinity. What could the word parallel possibly have to do with grammar? In short, parallelism is the rule that determines how to place items in lists in sentences. We often list items in English language sentences, and anytime we are listing items, we have to think carefully about the so-called parallel structure of the list. What do I mean by items, though? An item is any part of speech, such as nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs, that forms part of a list in a sentence. Anytime we are listing items in sentences, these items must be parallel to one another, by which I mean that the items in the list must all be the same part of speech. Let me give you a simple example of parallel structures so that you can see what I mean. Here's my example sentence. See if you can find the list in the sentence. For lunch, I ate a salad, a sandwich, and an ice cream. The example sentence that I have just given ends with a list, specifically a list of foods that I ate for lunch. First a salad, then a sandwich, and finally an ice cream. Importantly, each of these items in the list is the same type of thing. All of the items are foods that I can eat. Perhaps even more importantly, from a grammatical perspective, each of the items is the same part of speech. Each of the items is a noun. That means that the parallel structure of my list is correct. This sentence is parallel, which is a really, really good thing. Notice how just a slight change to the structure, however, would create a grammatically incorrect sentence. Here is another version of the same idea that is actually wrong. Check it out. For lunch, I ate a salad, a sandwich, and I had an ice cream for dessert. I suspect, because I have met many English speakers in my day, that many speakers of English would find this to be a grammatically correct sentence. But it is not. How come? Because look at the items in the list. Here we have 3 items. First, a noun in the word salad, second, a noun in the word sandwich, and third, a clause in the subject-verb pair, I had an ice cream for dessert. It's that third item in the list that breaks the parallel structure and that makes this sentence grammatically incorrect. How come? Because when you start listing items in a sentence, essentially what you do is set a rule that the rest of the items in the list must follow. It's like a sequence or a pattern in mathematics. If I give you the sequence 3, 6, 9, and then ask you for the next number in the sequence, you must follow the rule of adding 3 that is set by the first 3 items in the list. You must say 12 if you're going to keep following the same rule. In essence, the first and second items in the list in this sentence, salad and sandwich, establish a pattern that you must follow in setting the third item in the list. When the third item arrives in my sentence, notice how it breaks the rule that the first 2 items in the list established. Instead of a third noun, I have a clause. That violates the rules of parallelism. It's as though I had said that the next item in the sequence 3, 6, 9 were 26. As a result, consider the following revision to the sentence. The revision makes the parallelism correct. Here it is. For lunch, I had a salad and a sandwich, and for dessert, I had an ice cream. That's much better. Notice that in order to correct the parallelism error, I have broken the list into 2 parts. One part for what I ate for lunch, and another part for what I ate for dessert. This decision helps me avoid the parallelism issue altogether. Basically speaking, anytime you start a list of items in a sentence, you set a rule that you need to follow for all of the items in the sentence. It's essential that you know what type of items you are listing in order to evaluate whether the following items in the list obey the rule that the initial items in the list set. What are some of the types of items you might find in lists in sentences? Well, for starters, you can find the parts of speech. It's pretty common to list nouns in sentences, for example. It's also common to list adjectives. Consider this sentence, for instance. The weather was warm, sunny, and pleasant. In my sentence, I list 3 words that describe the weather today: warm, sunny, and pleasant. And the parallelism is working well in my sentence because all of the items in the list obey the adjective rule. Another part of speech that I might list is verbs. Consider this sentence, for example. Last night, I ate dinner, saw a movie, and had a glass of wine. The parallelism is functioning well in this sentence, but you should notice that the rules of parallelism involving verbs are a bit more complicated than are the rules involving the other parts of speech. If you start listing verbs, it's not enough to simply continue listing any old verbs. You need for the later verbs in the list to follow the same rules of tense and subject-verb agreement established by the first verb in the list. For instance, in the list that I have created here, the first verb in the list, ate, sets the rule for the later verbs in the list. What rule does it set? It sets the rule of subject-verb agreement, first of all. As we can see, the subject of the verb is I, so therefore, that same subject must be used for later verbs in the list. Secondly, the verb ate also sets a rule for tense. Specifically, it is written in the past tense, so all of the other verbs in the list must also be written in the past tense. And as we can see, they are. The other verbs in the list are saw and had, both past tense verbs conjugated for the subject I. Watch out for parallelism involving verbs. This can prove a rather challenging one to master since you multiply the challenges of accurate tense and subject-verb agreement by the challenges involved in creating a grammatical list. In our next lesson, we will continue studying parallel structure, looking at some even more complex topics involving this challenging issue. Specifically, we'll look at what happens when you try to create parallel structures involving phrases and clauses. These 2 types of groups of words, phrases and clauses, require more than just a single word in a single part of speech. As a result, parallelism with these 2 types of groups of words is a next-level skill. As you move forward in your journey through the English language, remember that all of the skills we have learned to this point build upon one another. I have designed the Spread the Word campaign as a progressive curriculum in which later lessons take for granted the knowledge gained in earlier ones. If the topic of parallelism proves a bit too challenging, you might go back and rewatch videos on subject-verb agreement, verb tense, clause structure, and other relevant issues that I have mentioned in today's lesson. Next week, we'll pick up right where we're leaving off, on parallel structure involving phrases and clauses. That's all for now, and don't forget, spread the word.